Okay, well, let's move on to, there's one thing I want to talk about in terms of how we shot the film, because we'll stick to the production side first before we move into a little bit of editing and then et cetera down the line. It's a Talking Heads documentary, and it's a long one. The final cut was about 2 hours, 25 minutes. Before that, the cut was 2 hours, 45 minutes. And sometimes it's a lot to ask people to sit down for that length of time. Aside from the score and everything, the question was how do we get, these intellectual ideas relayed in a way that's going to provide intimacy, that's going to provide some level of human connection with a lot of these larger issues. So I was a big fan of Errol Morris's Interatron idea. I don't know if anybody knows what that looks like, but it's basically a system where the interview subject will be looking down the barrel of the lens toward the audience. So instead of the traditional looking slightly over to the side where the interview subject is parked beside the camera, and the interview subject's eyes will be sort of focused over there. That's one relationship that you can create, and a valid one, between the interview subject and the audience. And this one, again, because there's so much raw information coming at you over and over again, having the eye contact, I think, helps carry people through. So the idea was we couldn't really afford Errol Morris's system because we were a small company working out of Mark's house in Vancouver. So we came up with a different model that I'll show you right here. You can see that? Okay, great. So Errol Morris's idea was that it's a series of teleprompters, right? And it's changed now with fog of war and everything. There's 10 million cameras in the whole thing. But early on, it was a single camera situation. So the idea was that Morris would have a video screen that the interview subject would be looking at. The camera would be behind a mirror that was looking at the interview subject. And the interviewer was in another room, potentially, being videotaped, and his or her image would be, well, in Errol Morris's case, his would be projected onto this two-way mirror. But we didn't have those resources, so instead, it was a similar idea without the teleprompters. So Mark sat here, camera here, two-way mirror here, so the camera is shooting right through, but the interview subject is looking directly into the eyes of the interviewer. The thing that was added to the equation that I think was really interesting was the blue screen at the back. We're interviewing a variety of people, economists, activists, CEOs, academics, about various ideas about the corporate form. So if you have those people in their environments, that's going to allow a particular read by the audience, right? If you see a CEO, behind a bookshelf, that's a pretty nice-looking bookshelf, and you see maybe a grassroots activist in a protest camp somewhere, that's going to allow for a particular read as well. And we had to be very flexible as to where we were shooting. Sometimes, when possible, we'd fly interview subjects over to the house so we could interview them there. Sometimes it was a small crew going to a hotel where we knew that a CEO was for a particular day or something. So we had to be very fast, mobile, and flexible. So the idea was to throw the blue screen back there just so we could put something behind there in post. Not sure what yet. It would depend on how the film was cut, what sort of came up during the edit, all that kind of thing. And we tried a bunch of stuff. For Michael Walker, we actually had for a while flying rows of sewing machines going behind him. And for the cow sequence, there were cows sort of moving around. But it got too distracting because you're really only seeing these people for 30 seconds at a time. So having a uniform, simple black background was a way of, I think, making it easier for the people to be seen in a common kind of environment. So maybe, as human beings, we can judge, right? And it's a way to maybe challenge that and not have that as prevalent when you're seeing the person for a short amount of time speaking to you. The hope is that we'd be seeing the person and not necessarily what that person is representing in a large way, right? There was also a side camera being used sometimes. I don't know if we've got it on here, but we threw that out after a while because it just got a bit too confusing. It was a lot of footage. We shot 120 hours or something of material, and it was a long, long edit time.
Do you find that the style of interview all kind of in the mirrors and interviewing kind of far away is more appropriate to this kind of interrogation rather than engaging with a human being?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I think that's why Morris's wife called it the Enteratron, because it is interrogation, exactly. It won't work for every film, perhaps, but for this film it was useful, and actually some of the CEOs we interviewed were so impressed by it, they kept saying, look, this is, this should be the standard for doing interviews of this kind. But it's not going to work for every film, for sure. But for this one, I think it was an appropriate, reaction to the situation that we were in. Anybody else?
Yeah, if you had a guy sitting right next to the camera.
Yeah, like right here?
Right next to it.
Yeah.
So it's almost looking towards the camera lens. I'm just wondering, would it be less powerful?
It depends. I mean, some of the early interviews we did before this whole scheme was worked out was like that. There's a Milton Friedman interview that I don't think you saw a clip. No, you didn't see a clip of him in here. But he was positioned over to the side, not the center of the frame, for example. And yeah, I mean, it still might work. The thing is, like, we did try a number of things, and this had the largest guarantee of eye contact with the audience than anything. So, and the uniformity of it is kind of nice, having each person in center frame looking right down the camera. So certainly, I've tried, and I'm sure some of you have tried doing that as well, just getting as close as possible to here, just as a best practice scenario. But if you've got the resources, you might want to give it a shot and see if it works, if it's appropriate for your film.